Is the person you're caring for hitting all the time? When you have to turn off the TV? When you have to leave the house? When you have to say no? Let's go for a walk and talk about 3 questions you can ask yourself to help you understand why. Whenever I'm dealing with a tough behavior, I like to ask myself these 3 questions. We'll call these my behavioral checklist. And these 3 questions are the tools that I want you to take away from this video. So number 1, what was happening before and after the behavior that you're interested in? You might have heard me call these the ABCs of behavior. Number 2, what sensory needs were or were not being met in the moments before and after that behavior? And number 3, how safe or unsafe was that person feeling before and after that behavior? To help introduce you to this concept, I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'll explain to you how those questions help me to form my strategies. It was late afternoon, and we were playing at the park with my 1.5-year-old son. It was starting to get late, and he was probably getting hungry, so we told him, all right, one more time down the slide, and then it's going to be time to go home. So he climbs up, makes his way down the slide, and then bolts to go up one more time. I intercept him, pick him up, and start walking towards his stroller. Bop, 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 bop. He hits me 5 times with an open hand in the face. Now, I did my best not to react and continued walking towards the stroller, put him in, buckled him up, and then with him howling and screaming, we started making our way back home. So it sounds unpleasant for everyone, doesn't it? It's the type of thing that you just want to forget. But if I want to be able to support my son better the next time that we need to leave the park, I have to be able to think back on it. I have to be able to reflect and ask myself, what could I have done differently? How could I have supported him in that moment when he needed it? And that's where those 3 questions come back in. So what happened before and after the hitting? What were the sensory needs that were or were not being met while he was playing before the hitting and then after? And then what could I have done differently to help him feel more safe in that tense moment? So let's answer that first question. What was happening before and after the behavior? Well, before, my son was playing at the park, he was having a good time. I gave the instruction that it was time to leave. Then the behavior happened. And then after, despite all his yelling and crying, I physically picked him up, put him in his chair, restrained him, and we left. So what could I have done differently before the behavior happened to try and support that transition a bit better? Something that I like to do is I like to set a timer on my phone, and it would look like this. So I would give the instruction to my son, okay, buddy, in 10 minutes when my timer beeps, it's going to be time to go home. And then I'd start my timer. Now, he's a little young at 1.5, but it's good to get that practice in. Now, maybe you don't want to use the phone or a timer. Maybe you'd like to use something else. Well, when I was a kid, what my parents did was they told me, hey, when the street lights come on, that's your signal to come home. And that seemed to work pretty well for us before smartphones. So maybe you have something that works for you already. Use what works. So what else could I do? Well, remember, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so he was probably getting hungry and thirsty. So something that I can do is I can offer him a snack, like crackers and water, as part of my instruction to go home. It'd be something like, all right, buddy, it's time to go home. We can have some crackers and water in the stroller on the way. Now, something that's really important to remember is that playing at the park at this moment is the most important thing to my son. So it's a pretty big request to tell him to just stop and go home. So when I'm offering him something as part of leaving, it has to be as good or better than the park. I know that my son really likes crackers, so I'm confident that that's going to help with the transition. But I'm not going to offer him broccoli as part of leaving because I know that he doesn't like that. Question number 2. What sensory needs are or are not being met by playing at the park? Well, if you think about it, playing at the park is probably meeting a lot of his movement needs. So that's things like vestibular, so balance. That's proprioception, which is movement, and tactile, which is touch. These are all probably being met just by playing at the park. And the good news is that strategy that I gave you before about using a 10-minute warning, that's going to allow him to try to meet those needs for 10 more minutes before it's time to go. So there's a good chance in that 10 minutes he's able to meet those needs, so when it's time to go, it's going to be easier to leave. Now the other thing is his interoceptive needs, okay? His interoceptive needs, that's how his organs are feeling related to hunger and thirst. We agreed that that's probably something that wasn't being met by 4 in the afternoon. So something that I can do is, by planning ahead and bringing his favorite foods, I can offer something like the crackers or the water or the juice as part of having to leave. So I'm going to meet that interoceptive need that he might not even be aware of. And if it turns out that those movement needs we were talking about aren't fully met after that 10 minutes, as part of my instruction to leave, I can offer another movement activity that he really likes. So for example, I could give him a piggyback on the way home to try and help meet some of those movement needs. Or we can pretend to walk like dinosaurs as we go. I know that that's an activity he likes, and that's also going to help to keep meeting those movement needs that maybe didn't get completely met by playing at the park. Okay, so question number 3. Did my son feel safe or unsafe in those moments? Well, think about it. He tried to get away from me. He was yelling, he was crying, he was screaming. I think it's safe to say that he probably felt unsafe in those moments. Try to remember that aggressive behaviors can sometimes be the outward expression of people feeling threatened, even children. And this outward expression of that feeling threatened is their way of protecting themselves. With that in mind, the strategies that we've described before should probably help him to make that transition from the park go a little bit more smoothly. But if he's still frustrated, something that I can do is first check in with myself, take a deep breath, relax my shoulders, uncross my arms, make sure that my face looks neutral, I'm not frowning, and speak to him in a calm voice, saying something like, "I know, buddy, it's hard to leave the park. We're having a really good time. Maybe we can come back tomorrow." I might do this kneeling down next to him, but also remember, if he's frustrated and I get too close to him, he might hit me. My experience has told me that. So maybe I'm going to give him some space while he's frustrated, but I can still talk to him using a calming voice. Now, I don't want you to think that you shouldn't ever physically touch somebody. I don't want you to think I'm saying, let your person run wild on a busy street or a busy parking lot because you don't want to touch them when they're frustrated. Yours and their safety is always going to be the most important. And if that means holding a hand, holding an arm, putting on a seatbelt to make sure that they can't run into danger, so be it. But I do want you to reflect on all of the times that it's happened in the past so that you can think ahead, you can plan ahead for ways that you can help make that transition go more smoothly, touching as little as possible. Okay, so that wraps up our video for today. Today we talked through how I come up with strategies to support my son when it's time to leave the park. But stay tuned for the next video in the series, where we'll take those 3 questions and we'll work through a more complex case together. Until then, remember to ask yourself those 3 questions. What was happening before and after the behavior I'm interested in? What sensory needs are or aren't being met in the moments around the behavior? And what can you do differently to help the person feel more safe in those tense moments? See you next time.